Welcome back, biologists. So, at this point in the semester, we have spent most of our time talking about animals. We talked about how animals diversified into the different phyla we have. We talked about different characteristics of animals, and we really specialized in on our chordates and especially humans with the different organ systems and different traits that we have. So, now we're going to turn to plants and spend the rest of our semester talking about plants and how plants have evolved into different phyla and the different structures and functions we see in them. So if you look outside your window, you probably can see some plants. If you go on a hike, you'll see lots of plants. You might see something kind of similar to this picture. But this is not what you would have seen for most of Earth's history. For most of Earth's history, life was confined to the water, and there wasn't a lot of land. There weren't a lot of land plants. But eventually, about 500 million years ago, small plants started colonizing land. And with that, fungi came, and those plants provided habitat for animals, and animals joined them on the shore. Then by about 385 million years ago, we started having forests. Those forests at that time would have looked very different from the forests now because life has evolved into our modern plants that we have today, although they still would have been trees and other plants very similar to what you would have recognized as today. Just like we talked about how animals evolved from protists, plants also evolved from protists, but from a different type of protist. Plants evolved from algae, specifically from green algae called charophytes. Charophytes are the green algae that are the closest relatives of land plants. If we look at a lot of traits of plants, we can see similar traits in algae. So a plant is a multicellular, eukaryotic photoautotroph. Those are words you should know. If any of those are not comfortable, please pause this video and go review through your notes or look it up to make sure you know those words. Brown, red, and green algae are also eukaryotic photoautotrophs. Plants have cell walls made of cellulose. Green algae, dinoflagellates, and brown algae have cell walls made of cellulose. Plants have chloroplasts with chlorophyll A and B. Green algae, euglena, and some dinoflagellates have chlorophyll A and B within chloroplasts. So plants are very similar to algae, but they have a lot of traits that they only share with charophytes, charophytes being their closest algal relatives. So plants and charophytes both have cellulose synthesizing membrane proteins that are arranged in rings. Most other algae, they produce their cellulose in linear sets. So we see plants are more similar to charophytes in this feature. The structure of their flagellated sperm, plants and charophytes have more similar structure than to the other algae. Plants and charophytes both have similarities in the sequence of their nuclear DNA, that is the DNA within their nucleus, their chloroplast DNA, and mitochondrial DNA, so the DNA within their chloroplast and the mitochondria. And then both plants and charophytes form something called a phragmoplast, which are microtubules that create the cell plate in cell division for both charophytes and plants. And please make sure that cell plate, that is something we talked about before. If you don't know what I'm talking about there, you can go back and look at your notes from last semester. One thing just to keep clear, plants are not descended from charophytes, but they share a common ancestor. Then there are some key traits that plants have evolved as they live on land that have facilitated plant life, but were absent in charophytes. So these are traits that plants evolved after they split from the other groups. This would include alternation of generations. This is something we talked about last semester when we talked about cell division. Plants have walled spores that are produced in sporangia. They have apical meristems. They have multicellular dependent embryos. and multicellular gametangia. These last four, if those are words that you don't know yet, that's what we're about to talk about. And even the first one, if you're not comfortable, we'll talk about that a little more. So first, the alternation of generations. So life cycles of plants alternate between two generations. They have two distinct multicellular generations that each give rise to the other. They have a sporophyte, which is a diploid multicellular organism that produces spores. So sporophyte produces spores. It goes through meiosis to produce spores. Those spores then reproduce by mitosis to create a gametophyte. And the gametophyte reproduces through mitosis to produce gametes. So in an animal, it would just be a multicellular diploid, goes through meiosis, produces gametes. We have this whole extra part here. So in plants, a sporophyte produces spores through meiosis. The spore multiplies through mitosis to make a multicellular organism called a gametophyte. The gametophyte reproduces through mitosis to produce gametes. Then two gametes fuse in fertilization to produce a zygote, which reproduces through mitosis to produce a sporophyte. So it's a little bit extra stuff here that we don't see in animals. Make sure you can keep gametophytes and sporophytes. Which one is diploid and haploid? Which one produces spores? Which one produces gametes? Make sure that you're very comfortable that you would be able to draw this whole process out. Plants create multicellular dependent embryos. So these multicellular plant embryos will develop from zygotes, and the zygotes will be retained within the tissue of the female parent's gametophyte. The parental tissue will protect the embryo from the environment and also provides nutrients like amino acids and sugars. The embryo has a specialized placental transport cells that will facilitate the transport of nutrients within it. This is a significant character, and plants that possess this are called embryophytes. Plants can produce walled spores that are produced within their sporangia. Here is a gametophyte, and here is a sporophyte, and here are the sporangium, which are going to produce those walled spores. Spores contain a polymer of sporopollenin that makes it tough and resistant to the environment. That's important so it can be dispersed without harm. And the sporophyte contains multicellular organs called sporangia. Sporangia have the diploid cells called sporophytes, or the spore mother cells that produce haploid spores by mitosis. And it has other tissues that protect the developing spores. And this is a key to adaptation for life on land. Plants can produce gametes within their organs called gametangia. So the female gametangia is the archegonia. That's what's shown in this image. It produces a single non-motile egg or an ovum. Male gametangia is called the antheridia, and they produce flagellated sperm, which can swim through water to fertilize the egg. And this results in fertilization, which forms a zygote, which then will form into an embryo. Plants contain apical meristems, so their roots underground and the shoots above the ground will increase their exposure to light and carbon dioxide in the shoots or water and mineral nutrients below the ground. And these roots and shoots grow in their length at their apical meristems. Apical meristems here are where the cells are divided repeatedly, and they eventually form many tissues and give rise to leaves and roots. Plants also contain a cuticle. This is a waxy covering around their epidermis, the outside of the plant, that helps reduce water loss. And they also have stomata, which are pores that help bring in oxygen or release carbon dioxide between the outside air and the internal plant tissues so that the plant has access to carbon dioxide to go through photosynthesis. And also the earliest plants did not have roots and leaves, and they developed a symbiosis with fungi. This is called mycorrhizal fungi to absorb nutrients. This was critical for plants to be able to colonize land But we still see many plants that have mycorrhizal fungi. They still have this association today. Okay, so you are responsible for knowing all of that information we just talked about. But here's a few questions to help you focus in some of your understanding, to check your understanding. Why do researchers identify charophytes rather than other groups of algae as the closest living relatives of plants? Identify 4 derived traits and distinguish plants from charophyte green algae and facilitate life on land. And then a weird question. What would the human life cycle be like if we had alternation of generations? Assume that the multicellular diploid stage would be similar in form to an adult human. Try to answer those questions on your own. If you can't, you can go back and look at the slides before this. And if you need help beyond that, it's also in the back of your textbook. These are discussed and these questions come right from your textbook. And you're also welcome to come in and visit me during office hours. All right, I will see you later. We'll start talking about the diversity of plant types that we have. Bye.